Welcome to the Read Along Audiobooks production of Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This video includes all of the chapter's original text, so that you can read along with the audio. Remember to subscribe with the notification bell turned on, so you will be notified whenever we post a new audiobook. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 30. On Parole. I was wakened. Indeed, we were all wakened, for I could see even the sentinel shake himself together from where he had fallen against the door-post. By a clear, hearty voice hailing us from the margin of the wood. "Blockhouse, ahoy!" it cried. "Here's the doctor." And the doctor it was. Although I was glad to hear the sound, yet my gladness was not without admixture. I remembered with confusion my insubordinate and stealthy conduct, and when I saw where it had brought me, among what companions and surrounded by what dangers, I felt ashamed to look him in the face. He must have risen in the dark, for the day had hardly come, and when I ran to a loophole and looked out, I saw him standing, like Silver once before, up to the mid-leg in creeping vapor. "You, doctor." "Top o' the morning to you, sir," cried Silver, broad awake and beaming with good nature in a moment. "Bright and early, to be sure, and it's the early bird, as the saying goes, that gets the rations. George, shake up your timbers, son, and help Dr. Livesey over the ship's side. All a doin' well, your patience was. All well and merry." So he pattered on, standing on the hilltop with his crutch under his elbow, and one hand upon the side of the log house. Quite the old John in voice, manner, and expression. "We've quite a surprise for you too, sir," he continued. "We've a little stranger here. He a no boarder and lodger, sir, and looking fit and taut as a fiddle, slept like a supercargo, he did, right alongside of John. Stem to stem we was, all night." Dr. Livesey was by this time across the stockade and pretty near the cook, and I could hear the alteration in his voice as he said, "Not Jim?" "The very same Jim as ever was," says Silver. The doctor stopped outright, although he did not speak, and it was some seconds before he seemed able to move on. "Well, well," he said at last, "duty first and pleasure afterwards, as you might have said yourself, Silver. Let us overhaul these patients of yours." A moment afterwards he had entered the blockhouse, and with one grim nod to me proceeded with his work among the sick. He seemed under no apprehension, though he must have known that his life, among these treacherous demons, depended on a hair, and he rattled on to his patients as if he were paying an ordinary professional visit in a quiet English family. His manner, I suppose, reacted on the men, for they behaved to him as if nothing had occurred, as if he were still ship's doctor and they still faithful hands before the mast. "You're doing well, my friend," he said to the fellow with the bandaged head, "and if ever any person had a close shave, it was you. Your head must be as hard as iron. Well, George, how goes it? You're a pretty color, certainly. Why, your liver, man, is upside down. Did you take that medicine?" "Did he take that medicine, men?" Aye, sir, he took it, sure enough," returned Morgan. "Because, you see, since I am mutineer's doctor, or prison doctor as I prefer to call it," says Dr. Livesey in his pleasantest way, "I make it a point of honor not to lose a man for King George, God bless him, and the gallows." The rogues looked at each other, but swallowed the home thrust in silence. "Dick don't feel well, sir," said one. "Don't he?" replied the doctor. "Well, step up here, Dick, and let me see your tongue." "No, I should be surprised if he did. The man's tongue is fit to frighten the French." "Another fever." "Ah there," said Morgan, "that comment of espioling Bibles. That comes, as you call it, of being arrant asses," retorted the doctor, "and not having sense enough to know honest air from poison, and the dry land from a vile, pestiferous slough. I think it most probable, though of course it's only an opinion, that you'll all have the deuce to pay before you get that malaria out of your systems. Camp in a bog, would you? Silver, I'm surprised at you. You're less of a fool than many, take you all round, but you don't appear to me to have the rudiments of a notion of the rules of health. Well," he added after he had dosed them round, and they had taken his prescriptions, with really laughable humility, more like charity schoolchildren than blood-guilty mutineers and pirates. "Well, that's done for today. And now I should wish to have a talk with that boy, please." And he nodded his head in my direction carelessly. George Mary was at the door, spitting and spluttering over some bad-tasted medicine, but at the first word of the doctor's proposal he swung round with a deep flush and cried no and swore. Silver struck the barrel with his open hand. "Silence," he roared and looked about him positively like a lion. "Doctor," he went on in his usual tones, "I was thinking of that, knowing as how you had a fancy for the boy. We're all humbly grateful for your kindness, and as you see, puts faith in you, and takes the drugs down like that much grog. And I take it I've found a way as'll suit all. Hawkins, will you give me your word of honor as a young gentleman? For a young gentleman you are, although poor born. Your word of honor not to slip your cable?" I readily gave the pledge required. "Then, doctor," said Silver, "you just step outside o' that stockade, and once you're there I'll bring the boy down on the inside, and I reckon you can yarn through the spars. Good day to you, sir, and all our due ties to the squire and Captain Smollett." The explosion of disapproval, which nothing but Silver's black looks had restrained, broke out immediately the doctor had left the house. Silver was roundly accused of playing double, of trying to make a separate peace for himself, of sacrificing the interests of his accomplices and victims, and, in one word, of the identical, exact thing that he was doing. It seemed to me so obvious in this case, that I could not imagine how he was to turn their anger. But he was twice the man the rest were, and his last night's victory had given him a huge preponderance on their minds. He called them all the fools and dolts you can imagine, said it was necessary I should talk to the doctor, fluttered the chart in their faces, asked them if they could afford to break the treaty the very day they were bound treasure hunting. "No, by thunder," he cried. "It's us must break the treaty when the time comes, and till then I'll gammon that doctor, if I have to oil his boots with brandy." And then he bade them get the fire lit, and stalked out upon his crutch, with his hand on my shoulder, leaving them in a disarray, and silenced by his volubility rather than convinced. "Slow, lad, slow," he said. "They might round upon us in a twinkle of an eye if we was seen to hurry." Very deliberately, then, did we advance across the sand to where the doctor awaited us on the other side of the stockade, and as soon as we were within easy speaking distance Silver stopped. "You'll make a note of this here also, doctor," says he, "and the boy'll tell you how I saved his life, and were deposed for it too, and you may lay to that. Doctor, when a man's steering as near the wind as me, playing chuck farthing with the last breath in his body, like, you wouldn't think it too much, mayhap, to give him one good word? You'll please bear in mind it's not my life only now. It's that boy's into the bargain, and you'll speak me fair, doctor, and give me a bit o' hope to go on, for the sake of mercy." Silver was a changed man once he was out there, and had his back to his friends in the blockhouse. His cheeks seemed to have fallen in, his voice trembled. Never was a soul more dead in earnest. "Why, John, you're not afraid?" asked Dr. Livesey. "Doctor, I'm no coward, no, not I, not so much," and he snapped his fingers. "If I was I wouldn't say it. But I'll own up fairly, I've the shakes upon me for the gallows. You're a good man and a true, I never seen a better man. And you'll not forget what I done good, not any more than you'll forget the bad, I know. And I step aside. See here. And leave you and Jim alone. And you'll put that down for me too, for it's a long stretch, is that?" So saying, he stepped back a little way, till he was out of earshot, and there sat down upon a tree stump and began to whistle, spinning round now and again upon his seat so as to command a sight, sometimes of me and the doctor and sometimes of his unruly ruffians as they went to and fro in the sand between the fire, which they were busy rekindling, and the house from which they brought forth pork and bread to make the breakfast. "So, Jim," said the doctor sadly, "here you are. As you have brewed, so shall you drink, my boy. Heaven knows, I cannot find it in my heart to blame you, but this much I will say, be it kind or unkind, when Captain Smollett was well, you dared not have gone off, and when he was ill and couldn't help it, by George, it was downright cowardly." I will own that I here began to weep. "Doctor," I said, "you might spare me. I have blamed myself enough, my life's forfeit anyway, and I should have been dead by now if Silver hadn't stood for me, and doctor, believe this, I can die. And I dare say I deserve it. But what I fear is torture. If they come to torture me, Jim, the doctor interrupted, and his voice was quite changed. Jim, I can't have this. Whip over, and we'll run for it. Doctor, said I passed my word. I know, he cried. We can't help that, Jim, now. I'll take it on my shoulders, holus bolus, blame and shame, my boy, but stay here, I cannot let you. Jump. One jump, and you're out, and we'll run for it like antelopes. No, I replied, you know right well you wouldn't do the thing yourself. Neither you nor Squire nor Captain, and no more will I. Silver trusted me, I passed my word, and back I go. But, doctor, you did not let me finish. If they come to torture me, I might let slip a word of where the ship is, for I got the ship, part by luck and part by risking, and she lies in North Inlet, on the southern beach, and just below high water. At half tide she must be high and dry. The ship, exclaimed the doctor. Rapidly I described to him my adventures, and he heard me out in silence. There is a kind of fate in this, he observed when I had done. Every step, it's you that saves our lives, and do you suppose by any chance that we are going to let you lose yours? That would be a poor return, my boy. You found out the plot, you found Ben Gunn. The best deed that ever you did, or will do, though you live to 90. Oh, by Jupiter, and talking of Ben Gunn. Why, this is the mischief in person. Silver, he cried. Silver. I'll give you a piece of advice, he continued as the cook drew near again. Don't you be in any great hurry after that treasure. Why, sir, I do my possible, which that ain't, said Silver. I can only, asking your pardon, save my life and the boys by seeking for that treasure, and you may lay to that. Well, Silver, replied the doctor, if that is so, I'll go one step further. Look out for squalls when you find it. Sir, said Silver, as between man and man, that's too much and too little. What you're after, why you left the blockhouse, why you given me that there chart, I don't know now, do I? And yet I done your bidding with my eyes shut, and never a word of hope. But no, this here's too much. If you won't tell me what you mean plain out, just say so and I'll leave the helm. No, said the doctor musingly, I've no right to say more. It's not my secret, you see, Silver, or, I give you my word, I'd tell it you. But I'll go as far with you as I dare go, and a step beyond, for I'll have my wig sorted by the captain, or I'm mistaken. And first, I'll give you a bit of hope, Silver, if we both get alive out of this wolf trap, I'll do my best to save you, short of perjury. Silver's face was radiant. You couldn't say more, I'm sure, sir, not if you was my mother, he cried. Well, that's my first concession, added the doctor. My second is a piece of advice, keep the boy close beside you, and when you need help, halloo. I'm off to seek it for you, and that itself will show you if I speak at random. Goodbye, Jim. And Dr. Livesey shook hands with me through the stockade, nodded to Silver, and set off at a brisk pace into the wood. Chapter 31. The Treasure Hunt Flint's Pointer. Jim, said Silver when we were alone, if I saved your life, you saved mine, and I'll not forget it. I seen the doctor waving you to run for it. With the tail of my eye I did, and I seen you say no, as plain as hearing. Jim, that's one to you. This is the first glint of hope I had since the attack failed, and I owe it you. And now, Jim, we're to go in for this here treasure hunting, with sealed orders too, and I don't like it, and you and me must stick close, back to back like, and we'll save our necks in spite o' fate and fortune. Just then a man hailed us from the fire that breakfast was ready, and we were soon seated here and there about the sand over biscuit and fried junk. They had lit a fire fit to roast an ox, and it was now grown so hot that they could only approach it from the windward, and even there not without precaution. In the same wasteful spirit, they had cooked, I suppose, 3 times more than we could eat, and one of them, with an empty laugh, threw what was left into the fire, which blazed and roared again over this unusual fuel. I never in my life saw men so careless of the morrow. Hand to mouth is the only word that can describe their way of doing, and what with wasted food and sleeping sentries, though they were bold enough for a brush and be done with it, I could see their entire unfitness for anything like a prolonged campaign. Even Silver, eating away, with Captain Flint upon his shoulder, had not a word of blame for their recklessness. And this the more surprised me, for I thought he had never shown himself so cunning as he did then. "Aye, mates," said he, "it's lucky you have barbecue to think for you with this here head. I got what I wanted, I did. Sure enough, they have the ship. Where they have it, I don't know yet, but once we hit the treasure, we'll have to jump about and find out. And then, mates, us that has the boats, I reckon, has the upper hand. Thus he kept running on, with his mouth full of the hot bacon. Thus he restored their hope and confidence, and, I more than suspect, repaired his own at the same time. As for hostage, he continued, that's his last talk, I guess, with them he loves so dear. I've got my piece o' news, and thank ye to him for that, but it's over and done. I'll take him in a line when we go treasure hunting, for we'll keep him like so much gold, in case of accidents, you mark, and in the meantime. Once we got the ship and treasure both and off to sea like jolly companions, why then we'll talk Mr. Hawkins over, we will, and we'll give him his share, to be sure, for all his kindness. It was no wonder the men were in a good humor now. For my part, I was horribly cast down. Should the scheme he had now sketched prove feasible, Silver, already doubly a traitor, would not hesitate to adopt it. He had still a foot in either camp, and there was no doubt he would prefer wealth and freedom with the pirates to a bare escape from hanging, which was the best he had to hope on our side. Nay, and even if things so fell out that he was forced to keep his faith with Dr. Livesey, even then what danger lay before us? What a moment that would be when the suspicions of his followers turned to certainty, and he and I should have to fight for dear life. He a cripple and I a boy. Against 5 strong and active seamen. Add to this double apprehension the mystery that still hung over the behavior of my friends, their unexplained desertion of the stockade, their inexplicable cession of the chart, or harder still to understand, the doctor's last warning to Silver, look out for squalls when you find it, and you will readily believe how little taste I found in my breakfast, and with how uneasy a heart I set forth behind my captors on the quest for treasure. We made a curious figure, had anyone been there to see us. All in soiled sailor clothes and all but me armed to the teeth. Silver had 2 guns slung about him. One before and one behind. Besides the great cutlass at his waist and a pistol in each pocket of his square-tailed coat. To complete his strange appearance, Captain Flint sat perched upon his shoulder and gabbling odds and ends of purposeless sea talk. I had a line about my waist and followed obediently after the sea cook, who held the loose end of the rope, now in his free hand, now between his powerful teeth. For all the world, I was led like a dancing bear. The other men were variously burthened, some carrying picks and shovels. For that had been the very first necessary they brought ashore from the Hispaniola. Others laden with pork, bread, and brandy for the midday meal. All the stores, I observed, came from our stock, and I could see the truth of Silver's words the night before. Had he not struck a bargain with the doctor, he and his mutineers, deserted by the ship, must have been driven to subsist on clear water and the proceeds of their hunting. Water would have been little to their taste. A sailor is not usually a good shot, and besides all that, when they were so short of eatables, it was not likely they would be very flush of powder. Well, thus equipped, we all set out. Even the fellow with the broken head, who should certainly have kept in shadow. And straggled, one after another, to the beach, where the 2 gigs awaited us. Even these bore trace of the drunken folly of the pirates, one in a broken thwart, and both in their muddy and unbaled condition. Both were to be carried along with us for the sake of safety, and so, with our numbers divided between them, we set forth upon the bosom of the anchorage. As we pulled over, there was some discussion on the chart. The Red Cross was, of course, far too large to be a guide, and the terms of the note on the back, as you will hear, admitted of some ambiguity. They ran, the reader may remember, thus: Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the N of NNE. Skeleton Island ESE and by E. 10 feet. A tall tree was thus the principal mark. Now, right before us the anchorage was bounded by a plateau from 200 to 300 feet high, adjoining on the north the sloping southern shoulder of the spyglass and rising again towards the south into the rough, cliffy eminence called the mizzenmast hill. The top of the plateau was dotted thickly with pine trees of varying height. Every here and there, one of a different species rose 40 or 50 feet clear above its neighbors, and which of these was the particular tall tree of Captain Flint could only be decided on the spot, and by the readings of the compass. Yet, although that was the case, every man on board the boats had picked a favorite of his own ere we were halfway over, Long John alone shrugging his shoulders and bidding them wait till they were there. We pulled easily, by Silver's directions, not to weary the hands prematurely, and after quite a long passage, landed at the mouth of the second river. That which runs down a woody cleft of the spyglass. Thence, bending to our left, we began to ascend the slope towards the plateau. At the first outset, heavy, miry ground and a matted, marish vegetation greatly delayed our progress, but by little and little the hill began to steepen and become stony underfoot, and the wood to change its character and to grow in a more open order. It was, indeed, a most pleasant portion of the island that we were now approaching. A heavy-scented broom and many flowering shrubs had almost taken the place of grass. Thickets of green nutmeg trees were dotted here and there with the red columns and the broad shadow of the pines, and the first mingled their spice with the aroma of the others. The air, besides, was fresh and stirring, and this, under the sheer sunbeams, was a wonderful refreshment to our senses. The party spread itself abroad, in a fan shape, shouting and leaping to and fro. About the center and a good way behind the rest, Silver and I followed. I tethered by my rope, he plowing, with deep pants, among the sliding gravel. From time to time, indeed, I had to lend him a hand, or he must have missed his footing and fallen backward down the hill. We had thus proceeded for about half a mile, and were approaching the brow of the plateau when the man upon the farthest left began to cry aloud, as if in terror. Shout after shout came from him, and the others began to run in his direction. "He can't have found the treasure," said old Morgan, hurrying past us from the right, "for that's clean atop." Indeed, as we found when we also reached the spot, it was something very different. At the foot of a pretty big pine and involved in a green creeper, which had even partly lifted some of the smaller bones, a human skeleton lay, with a few shreds of clothing, on the ground. I believe a chill struck for a moment to every heart. He was a seaman, said George Merry, who, bolder than the rest, had gone up close, and was examining the rags of clothing. "Leastways, this is good sea cloth." Aye, said Silver, like enough. "You wouldn't look to find a bishop here, I reckon. But what sort of a way is that for bones to lie? 'Tain't in nature dot." Indeed, on a second glance, it seemed impossible to fancy that the body was in a natural position. But for some disarray, the work, perhaps, of the birds that had fed upon him, or of the slow-growing creeper that had gradually enveloped his remains, the man lay perfectly straight. His feet pointing in one direction, his hands, raised above his head like a diver's, pointing directly in the opposite. "I've taken a notion into my old numbskull," observed Silver. "Here's the compass, there's the tip-top P&O Skeleton Island, sticking out like a tooth. Just take a bearing, will you, along the line of them bones." It was done. The body pointed straight in the direction of the island, and the compass read duly ESE in by E. "I thought so," cried the cook, "this here is a P&er. Right up there is our line for the Pole Star and the Jolly Dollars. But by thunder, if it don't make me cold inside to think of Flint. This is one of his jokes, and no mistake. Him and these 6 was alone here, he killed 'em, every man, and this one he hauled here and laid down by compass, shiver my timbers. They're long bones, and the hair's been yellow. Aye, that would be Allardyce." "You mind Allardyce, Tom Morgan?" Aye, returned Morgan, "I mind him. He owed me money, he did, and took my knife ashore with him." "Speaking of knives," said another, "why don't we find his end lying round? Flint warn't the man to pick a seaman's pocket, and the birds, I guess, would leave it be." "By the powers, and that's true," cried Silver. "There ain't a thing left here," said Mary, still feeling round among the bones, "not a copper doit nor a bocce box. It don't look nat'ral to me." "No, by gum, it don't," agreed Silver, "not nat'ral nor not nice, says you. Great guns, messmates, but if Flint was living, this would be a hot spot for you and me. 6 they were, and 6 are we, and bones is what they are now. I saw him dead with these here deadlights," said Morgan. "Billy took me in. There he laid, with penny pieces on his eyes. Dead." "Aye, sure enough he's dead and gone below," said the fellow with the bandage, "but if ever spirit walked, it would be Flint's. Dear heart, but he died bad, did Flint." "Aye, that he did," observed another, "now he raged, and now he hollered for the rum, and now he sang. 15 men were his only song, mates, and I tell you true, I never rightly liked to hear it since. It was main hot, and the windy was open, and I hear that old song comin' out as clear. And the death haul on the man already. Come, said Silver, stow this talk. He's dead, and he don't walk, that I know, leastways, he won't walk by day, and you may lay to that. Care killed a cat. Fetch a head for the doubloons. We started, certainly, but in spite of the hot sun and the staring daylight, the pirates no longer ran separate and shouting through the wood, but kept side by side and spoke with bated breath. The terror of the dead buccaneer had fallen on their spirits. This is the end of the chapter. We have linked to the next chapter on this screen, or please feel free to visit our channel to explore the other titles we have available. Please remember to subscribe with the notification bell turned on, so you will be notified whenever we post a new audiobook. Thank you.